are gathered here. It is 12:04 p.m. It's what did I say, May 14th, 2019? And it is, we are at agenda item 1.1, Moab Area Parking Workshop. So I'm assuming that we're going to have a presentation, but I just would like it to be no longer than 20 minutes so that we as a council have the opportunity to ask a bunch of questions and have some conversation. And then also, I'd like to see if we can get done here by 1, knowing that we've got our council meeting. We'll be joining again at 5 and likely here for a while since this is a pretty long agenda. Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah.
Because if we do have further questions after we hit 1 o'clock, then I suppose that could happen tonight, or we can spend the time between now and tonight to think about some things. So, okay, let's get started.
Okay, so this is a comprehensive parking update. We tried to touch on all the parking issues that I'm aware of in the city of Moab. The overview is we have the parking management study scope, which you've seen previously. It created a detailed inventory of the parking spaces in the study area. And that's a key element there, that there's a study area. We measured, evaluated, and analyzed the utilization of those spaces, calculated average parking duration, parking demand and compared it to observed utilization, and recommend parking management studies to reduce the negative impacts of parking. Also, I'd like to talk about hotspot funding eligible projects at the end of the slideshow, including the downtown parking structure, the dispersed parking lots, and the Main Street improvements. So regarding the parking management study, which is completed by Avenue Consultants, we reviewed many previous studies, and Ronnie, the Moab downtown plan is the one that's currently out there that you've been involved with.
I know about that one. They referred to so many, I was like, I can't tell.
The Arches area hotspot was the one that was done for the hotspot funding. The signal study was in 2015. Corridor preservation, I don't know the date on it. And then the Main Street bypass planning was done as part of the hotspot funding too. Okay, so those are all fairly current. The inventory study area, and this is where I'd like to make sure the council understands that the study area is greater than the downtown area. That's a key when we evaluate the results of the study, and I think that there was a perception that some of the statements in here about there being ample parking in the study area implied that there was no parking issues in the city. That's not what that statement means. It means the overall study area, and I'll go through it here.
You heard that, right?
I did not listen.
So the study area.
That you're referring to the Times Independent article.
Yeah,
That's why I just pointed at Carter,
I wasn't going to point at anybody.
Reporter. All right, you can point at me too.
So that's the study area. 200 south to 400 north, Center Street and 100 north. It's a larger area than just the immediate downtown, though we do include the downtown area.
And that northern boundary of the study area, is that just north of the...
Oh, it's 400 north. It's north of the churches up there.
So it's just hard to see from here. Just so
400 north is Broken Oar.
Yep. Up Emma Boulevard.
Okay. Up Emma Boulevard. So it's past 400 north.
Yeah.
It's up to...
Yeah, we extended it up there to the churches.
To the church. Oh, okay. Well, but on Main Street, not the church. There are not churches on Main Street.
No, not on Main Street.
It's to where the road widens.
It's up by the
to
Arches
4.
Realty. Yeah, exactly.
Arches Realty.
Yep.
Thank you.
We used aerial imagery. Basically, we flew a drone collected May 17th and 18th for 2018, from 9 to 7 p.m., 40 total flights, 10,152 aerial photos were taken and analyzed. And someone might say, well, is that valid information? And this is taken from UDOT's traffic information system, and you can see that the 5th busiest day in 2018 was May 18th, and the 17th busiest day was May 17th. So we caught a lot of traffic in the area when this information was categorized, is the point. This wasn't taken on slow days. These are relatively busy days. Parking supply on street, there's 470 angle parking stalls, 622 parallel parking stalls, 15 handicap stalls. City public lot has 69 stalls plus 2 handicapped. The Moab Information Center lot across Main Street is 38 stalls with 5 RV stalls. Other lots randomly in the area, about 239 stalls, private parking lots. There were 1,462 total parking spaces evaluated. And by evaluated, we determined that 41 to 53% of all the spaces were occupied on Thursday. 35 to 50% of all the spaces were occupied on Friday. And this is just a graph that shows, percentage of utilization on the vertical and then time on the horizontal axis. And it's showing that through the overall study area, utilization was right at 50% with the overall study area. And where is there limited? Now I'm going to drill down to where there are parking problem areas within the overall study area, if you will. Where utilization is greater than 85%, which generally means there's 1 to 2 available spaces per block. And those areas are Main Street, Center Street, 100 North, 100 South, and the MIC parking lot. This is a graphic that kind of shows you, green being go, it's like a traffic signal, or good, yellow being more utilization, and red being over 85%, or essentially no parking spaces or 1 parking space per block. And you can see that the orange and red is centered in the downtown area around Center Street and Main Street. Parking stall loss was another issue identified. Every hour observed had parking stall loss due to oversized vehicles, trailer, and inefficient parking. A lot of times that's on Main Street, and it's also on side streets where people just don't park close enough to the other people, bumper to bumper. Or you can see there the van and the trailer is taking up 3 parking spaces, essentially. On May 17th, 22 parking stalls were lost due to oversized vehicles and inefficient parking. Is that acceptable or normal? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but we at least have an inventory of it. Parking demand analysis, so those were observed data. We also conducted parking demand analysis using the International Transportation Engineers Parking Generation Manual, 4th edition, just as kind of a calibration method. It did daily and hourly parking demand by land use, and it's informational, but the starting point to understand potential parking demand. So what we did is we did actual observations, and then we did the research using an analytical approach to see how they compare. And from the parking demand said that generally less than 85% were occupied, but the block of Center Street to 100 North and Main Street to 100 East above 85% would be occupied. And here's this color-coded chart is based on the parking demand, and you can see at 9 o'clock in the morning it's like that. Oops. Yeah, I'll keep going in the interest of time. It essentially duplicates. On the weekend, a little bit more green, a little bit less red. The conclusion is because we consider land use in this evaluation, that a lot of the parking was driven by restaurant and retail uses, which is no surprise, it's our business area downtown. So this is just a graph comparing the observed utilization and the predicted demand from the manual, and you can see they're really pretty close. We're hovering right about 50% throughout. And here's the conclusions. I raced through that information because of time.
And that's fine. I mean, I'm assuming we all, read the report in our packets. It was the same report that was presented to us, 6 months ago?
Yeah,
so
that's
we're
right.
good with that. Thank you.
The conclusions, there is ample parking available in the overall study area for parking of standard-sized vehicles, cars or pickup trucks, not for RVs or oversized vehicles. There are localized areas like Center Street between Main 1 and West where parking demand exceeds parking supply. Some Main Street shoulder parking is lost due to the vehicles with trailers and inefficient spacing, we talked about. Restaurants generate the highest use. Peak demand hours are 1 p.m. and 6 p.m., basically lunch and dinner. Not a surprise there. People seem unwilling to walk greater than 300 feet from their vehicle to their destination. Part of that was based on some interviews that our consultant did with people. Just, as people park, they'd walk up to them and ask them, so what do you think? How far are you willing to walk and things? Nationally, it's usually about 600 feet. That's the number.
I'll wait till you finish, sorry.
Okay. Sorry. People may be unaware of available parking in the city-owned lot in other areas. And since that presentation 6 months ago, we've added a sign out there, and it seems to be using the city lot a little bit more. Recommendations: continue with free parking. That's only because paid parking generally doesn't pay for itself. 2-hour post public parking sign with a 2-hour time limit on streets, our busiest streets in the downtown area. Add parking signs to encourage parking in the city-owned lots and available spaces. Red curb paint to restrict parking within 30 feet of an intersection. We're pretty good on that, but there's a few places where we could improve upon that, and that's Utah State Code, so we should be doing that. Back and angle parking on roads with planned bike lanes. We've been through that exercise, and it's a safety issue and pretty minimal cost. Delineate specific parking stalls.
Sorry, can you go back one just real quick?
Yes.
Just to drive in the cost, $10 to $20 per line for the back end.
Yeah.
Okay.
Delineate specific parking stalls for the parallel parking downtown, especially on Main. What that really means is putting in transverse lines, like out here and on Center Street, so people know where they're supposed to park, what's a space and what's not a space, as opposed to just being open.
And that is for sure a solution?
It will improve it.
It would,
It would.
for sure. That's a studied, that's
right. That's a common
fact.
technique.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a common technique that's utilized in downtown areas especially. Continue forward with the plan to add a parking garage in the current city lot. The reason for that lot, that parking structure, is that it satisfies that downtown need, the area that's red in both the demand for the study and our observations. It will greatly improve parking conditions in downtown. And the cost, as we've been discussing, is funded through the state of Utah's hotspot funding. We've already been awarded that money, and if council signs that agreement tonight or in the future, we'll receive those funds. Continue forward the plan to add oversized parking lots north and south of Moab, and add wayfinding signs to encourage walking to destinations 1 to 2 blocks away. Relatively low cost, but it would be an improvement to provide knowledge to people. That's what the wayfinding signs do. Blasted through that, I've got a little bit I'd like to talk to you about hotspot funding. Should we just go through all of it, or do you want to stop and question about the study first, Mayor?
What do you all think? I think that's all somewhat relative.
So, okay, can I go ahead and
I
go
think.
through them? Oh,
Well, Kaylin's got a question.
Yeah.
Sure. So the unwillingness to walk 300 feet, that implies that people weren't able to find a parking spot some people may have been unable to find a parking spot within that radius and then went elsewhere.
That's
but
true.
you only interviewed people that did park.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
we're not putting I just thought it was an interesting fact, that one.
yes.
It doesn't really come into design so much, except that there's a national standard of that of about 600 feet.
Yeah,
So it was just a comparative statistic.
okay.
Yeah, it hasn't influenced any of the decision-making processes.
So one question I have for you, Chuck. We've talked a lot about these dispersed parking lots north and south of town for oversized vehicles and appropriate spaces, but where might the appropriate spaces be? Has anybody targeted specific parcels where they might go?
As part of the Arches hotspot funding study done by the UDOT's consultant, they just identified zones north and south of town. They never really got into parcels because there was not funding for them to do so. So what we've done, and I'll talk more a little bit about the dispersed parking now, I think I can answer your question.
Yeah.
I just have one more comment before we go into hotspot funding. That it's important to recognize like vehicle typology. So I kind of made a list, and I don't know if it's exhaustive, but maybe we can all be really clear about who is like parking where, because what I noticed with the study is that RV parking was mentioned only with respect to the MIC, that they have RV spots, and like I just know that driving around, RVs can still park on Main Street. But as you said, like if we delineate, that changes that scape. But we in Moab, we don't just have the compact and the sedan and the truck, which I think you call the regular vehicles and the standard size. We have the trucks pulling trailers, we have RVs, we have cars with bikes on top, which doesn't matter at footprint, but does matter when we're talking about a parking structure. And then RVs with trailers. I mean, the like never-ending vehicle.
That's right.
And is there another vehicle type that I'm forgetting? Because I think it's important when we're talking about a parking study that we're also saying what kind of vehicle can park where currently. And that wasn't really expressed in the study other than to note the RV spots at the.
We have tractor trailers too, that park.
Yeah, I think the answer is that there are no RV designated lots in town. The MIC is the only one that says those long spaces. At our city lot, we don't, because the geometry doesn't work for it right now.
So a further consideration that's not listed as part of the study that I think is worth for us to consider is that we do have this vehicle typology to consider. And so if we're looking at a dispersed parking plan, that we're really clear, like where's the safe place for an RV to land? Where's the safe place for like a Sprinter van to land? Where can a car with a bike on top land? And to make sure that we're providing available parking for all types of recreation vehicles or recreationists that are coming to Moab.
And I think we are doing so in the dispersed parking plan, moving towards resolving some of it. I'm not sure we're going to solve all of it, but definitely it's in our consideration.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's where that dispersed parking came from originally. The whole concept was to address that.
Yeah, well, it's just not in the implications for the study, so I just wanted to add it as a possible
That's right.
consideration.
Yeah, the study's not 100% comprehensive. I mean, other things have morphed, you know.
Yeah.
But-
Taylor?
I think that's a good point. And what we're really trying to address is mobility, and large vehicles are not necessarily that efficient. Like they may still, like an RV with a trailer may still only have 2 people in it. And so we just have to be careful with our limited resources, I think, that we encourage efficiency in the utilization of our transportation network. And that may mean we prioritize users that choose to be more efficient with their vehicle choices.
Well, and yeah, totally. And one way to prioritize is like sometimes priority is like parking at the front of the line or like at the parking closest to the door or parking free. But for the people that are visiting Moab, I mean, I don't know if you've done like rent the camper van and drive across the country. We get a lot of that in Moab. And while I hear what you're saying, they still need a safe place to land. And they may not be like the preferred spots, but we still need to consider those.
Yeah, so if I may, Chuck, on the subject of Main Street parking with delineated beginning and back bumper strips, I mean, that might work well on Provo, for example, but here with our big range of oversized vehicles, so how would you anticipate somebody comes in with a trailer behind them, for example, or a long RV, and they see an open spot, but they can't squeeze it all in? Do you expect them to pull right up and just overlap into the trailing lane or back up to where they can? I mean, it's not clear to me it'll be efficient.
Yeah, you shouldn't, well, to be honest with you, I'm not sure that we want to encourage people to park their RVs on Main Street in the downtown area. Out on the edges where those parking lanes are wider, there's more room for those RVs, but in the downtown area, those parking spaces are at the minimum width. So I think that if they don't park in the downtown area because they're taking up more stalls than a standard vehicle for 2 people, as you said, they can find an alternative route on the side streets.
So you're gonna put up a sign that says, if you're oversized, you cannot park on Main
Well,
Street?
the stripes say it. I mean, you're not supposed to.
But what's the intent?
The intent is to not have those vehicles taking up the stalls. Yeah, it's a recommendation.
Well, I understand that. I'm just trying to mull it over myself about
So
how would I
because
deal with this, you know?
The study has language that says,
I don't
line
know.
it, but don't enforce it, and that is a question we don't need to take up now, but I think a very basic question to what we keep coming back to with enforcement, like, are we just adding more stuff that we theoretically say we want to have happen, and then not going to commit to enforcing it? I mean, are we going to put up signage or not? Are we going to tell people we don't want certain vehicles parking there? Are we going to tell people if your vehicle is longer in this angled spot than the line that you shouldn't be parking here? So I just feel like we keep putting off that conversation, but that's part of all of this too.
Gonna be a lot of confusion. If you don't define
And
it.
same with this
okay.
idea of the 2-hour parking signs. Oh, put them in, but don't enforce them.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it does kind of fly in the face of then, if you're not going to enforce it, why have it?
Yeah. Long-term, I'd still like to see us, if we, any money left over, to identify those those oversized parking lots north and south of town. And then I'm with Charlotte on this one. I mean, I'd love to see a bus service through town, you know, that could later on talk about arches and all that. But right now, I'd be happy just to have a shuttle service that went between oversized lots, and then tell people, if you got oversized vehicles, you gotta strongly encourage that.
Yeah, because the other thing we see is long vehicles parking over 4, 6 angled parking spaces.
Yeah, that too.
Has there been any discussions with the larger hotels? I mean, so we require these large swaths of just open land for parking. It's only typically utilized in the evening. We're seeing that people need parking during the daytime for downtown. This goes back to the transportation discussion. Like, we have the areas that are not being utilized throughout the whole day, and yet we're thinking about, I don't know, creating more pavement for parking when they exist with the Marriotts, the Hyatts. There's all these. I mean, could an agreement happen between those businesses with a parking plan and, I mean, get really serious about a transit
So
discussion?
that's a really good point. There are parking spots outside of the study area that are available, that there are not congestion at the hotels. And that one of the implications could be like incentivizing people to leave their cars at their hotels. I mean, when I travel, I always ask the front desk, if I'm staying at a hotel, do you do free shuttle around town to save, money and not Uber?
Right.
You know what I mean? Or even take public transportation. But that's a really good point.
Could this be part of the dispersed parking study?
Could be, yeah.
Like include the number of parking stalls at hotels.
I'll include them as a stakeholder and potential partner.
Partner.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as a matter of practicality, I'm not sure how it plays out because you check in at 3 o'clock and you check out at 11 o'clock. So you got a 4-hour window when you're going to let people park there, perhaps, who aren't your customers. So I don't know how well that would work. It might.
Well, it could just be
The
coordinated.
new hotels, I will say, on the new hotels, I don't think it's codified.
It's not.
But we've been strongly encouraging them, and some of them are doing it on their own will, to include oversized vehicle parking,
Right.
for their customers. And that's a plus. Probably getting it codified would be a good thing. The requirement for parking in the hotels for a certain X amount of oversized vehicles. First is for future.
I just had one more thing before we go on to the study. Can you go back to the map that showed the heavily used, the red light, green light
Yep.
map that you were showing?
Almost there.
I just wanted to point out just a couple of spots on that map, because my thought is that anything that's yellow today could turn into orange or red tomorrow. I wanted to point out, way at the bottom right-hand side of that picture is like the 4th East Corridor, and there does feel ample parking. When Miltz is kicking at 6 p.m., there's a bit of a jam. And on where I live on Locust Lane, cars park all the way up Locust Lane too. While there's like a jam at a certain time every day, there's otherwise ample parking. I just wanted to make that comment. But also the north end, that yellow strip, what is yellow, which says it's utilized almost to 85%? Is that 85?
65 to 85.
Knowing that those parking spots are getting removed is a major implication too.
That's right.
So I just wanted to point that out.
Do you have any idea what the number is when we fix those spots that don't have the red striping 30 feet from the corner? What the number of parking spaces will be that we wipe out, if any?
Oh, no, I haven't done that analysis. I could, and I will, if you'd like me to.
Hey, this study is so helpful. I think that it really gives us a lot of data to work with. All right, so on to unless there's any other questions about the study or just comments, feedback.
And with us today is Ryan Anderson, who's the project manager out of Region 4 and also for the 191 widening. I think you've met Ryan before, but he was always interested in this, so he's also administering the hotspot funding projects. So he's here today too, in case there's questions that I can't answer.
Well, then maybe we should start by saying thank you. Thank you to UDOT for the hotspot funding. We're very, very grateful. Just because we're deliberating the nuts and bolts doesn't mean we're not super grateful. Thank you so much.
I totally understand. If I might add one thing to the conversation.
Will you come up and just into the microphone just because we've got recording?
I'll just squeeze in by it.
Yeah.
I'm not prepared to speak about it, but I think it might be worth mentioning that.
Right up in that microphone.
We may be able to learn some lessons from Springdale City, and it may be worth some type of a coordination effort with Springdale City. Recently, my understanding, and like I said, I wasn't directly involved. I just heard, through coworkers and that Robert Dow was directly involved, and I think he'd be good to come and address the council on that. But Springdale City did remove parking from their main street, and it was quite a contentious idea. There was a lot of people that were not in approval, and there was a lot of coordination, and there was some work done at the local hotels there, and there was a lot of precautionary things put in place. Like I said, I'm not prepared to speak in detail, but I know after removing the parking, they've all been very surprised about how little issue they've had. That a lot of what they are seeing is kind of what was brought up earlier, is they're seeing a lot more parking at the hotels, that people are tending to leave their vehicles at the hotels for longer periods of time. The hotels are working with their guests a little bit, and they're not seeing a major issue with removing parking on Main Street. So I don't know that it necessarily fits the scenario we're discussing here, and I think what Chuck has shown is showing that Moab is kind of in a teetering point, like you mentioned, Mayor, that there is a lot of areas where you could say, yeah, we could probably get by, but there's a lot of these teetering areas. And something I was going to bring up a little later, I'll just touch on now, is there has been some conceptual studies of removing parking from the downtown Main Street area in Moab. So I think that would, like you had mentioned, kind of push us into that greater need for for the parking structure and those other dispersed parking areas. But I just wanted to bring that up. It might be something that UDOT could facilitate even, where we could maybe try and get Springdale and Moab, because you guys have some unique similarities as far as recreational visitation.
No, they ended up not doing it because they found that it wasn't going to be worth their money to do that. But they have a transportation system, and that is the biggest difference. And if we want to compare ourselves and get a transportation system, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
But not having that piece, because it is so easy. You get on at your hotel, you could get dropped off every block if you wanted to, and that's our missing piece.
Oh, so that's the way Springdale is working? There's little impact because they have a bus service and stuff? Oh.
And it's really nice.
Do you know how they pay for it, Karen?
They,
A lot of UDOT
Yep.
support, but it was, I also I don't want to risk comparing Moab too closely to Springdale, because you guys do have some unique differences as well. One being that you guys are a major trucking route, that you guys are a major through route, that although you guys do have the recreational influx of visitors, you also have a regular stream of traffic through your area too that I don't think they have even, again, I'm not prepared to speak, so I'm not gonna put numbers to it, but if I were to guess, I would say that your numbers and your daily traffic during your non-peak times are significantly different from what would be going through Springdale. As I said, I think there's some similarities and some things you could draw on there, but I also think there's enough differences that I don't think their solutions will necessarily be the same solutions here. It's just, sometimes it's good to learn those lessons. It sounds like you're familiar with kind of what went on down there. I think everybody, would agree that their shuttle service down there has worked really good and eliminated a lot of their problems. I'm not sure that would be a full elimination of your guys' issues, but I think that would be something that's definitely good to keep discussing.
Well, because in comparing us to Springdale, I think what I'm hearing you say is they took UDOT money, and instead of doing a parking garage, they did a shuttle, and that seemed to have the
But they've
same
been
effect.
working on it for a long time, and they had a very close partnership with Zion's National Park. I mean, and we're trying to gain that right now. I mean, we're behind. It's not that it's impossible, and our valley's much bigger. I mean,
And it was a different funding source. It wasn't necessarily recreational hotspot funding. They've been working on a transit system in multiple stages down there in southern Utah. And so I'm not exactly sure how that funding was acquired, but I can tell you it was different than kind of what we're discussing here with the parking structure.
So using the hotspot funding is for structure.
but
That's what I'm asking.
But recently, with their hotspot money this last year, they are doing the transportation system from, what is it, not St. George, the other, Hurricane to Springdale? Isn't that what they're using their
That's what
16
that's what they
million for?
proposed. That's what they proposed for, yes.
Right.
So I think the difference here is what Moab proposed is a parking structure, and what they proposed was a transit system. Both of those were awarded for those distinct purposes.
Right.
So then, when we utilize this hotspot funding, can we apply for more?
I'm not sure this is a first go-round, from my understanding, with the legislative award of the hotspot funding, so Chuck he was more involved in the acquiring, I don't.
Yeah, so the legislature, the folks at Little Cottonwood Canyon went looking for money from the legislature to help them improve their roadway system. And being the process that it is, they said, well, we can help you, but we need to help the rest of the state too. So the legislature appropriated about $160 million, identified 4 hotspots within the state that they wanted to reduce traffic congestion, increase recreational opportunities, and provide economic development opportunities. We were the Arches area with Grand County and several members of the council and county council and local business people met with UDOT for 6 months, I think. Went through a process of a decision lens process, and we came up with a long list of projects, and the ones that rose to the top were bypass, Main Street improvements, parking structure, and dispersed parking. UDOT took it to the Transportation Commission, which the legislature had said, you guys administer these funds, make the selections for these various areas. And they selected those projects for the Arches area, where we received approximately $10 million worth of funds. 1.7 for dispersed parking, 8.3 million for the parking structure, which its cost estimate is 7.3 million, leaving about $1 million left over if that cost, which is almost 2 years old now, gotta remember, rise for Main Street improvements. So, long-winded way of saying that's what the genesis of the hotspot funding was. If the legislature is ever gonna go back and say, let's do it again, I don't know, I suppose it would come from local communities who would go to them, because that's how it started the first time.
Who was the sponsor?
I don't remember.
Well, something for us to look into.
Someone from the
But it was presented as one-time funding. I mean, it was a,
And it's important to note, Chuck, that bypass was not the construction of the bypass, it was a study.
That's right.
It wasn't a construction.
That's right, yeah, didn't mean to imply, yeah.
I don't think you did, I just think that that's how it gets out in the community. It wasn't meant to construct that.
Yeah.
Well, let's go down to hotspot funding.
So here's what the hotspot funding eligible projects are, meaning the money was dedicated by the Transportation Commission and administered through UDOT for these purposes. The downtown parking structure, which is proposed for and awarded funding from the hotspot. UDOT will sign an agreement allowing Moab to administer the project with certain constraints. You've seen that agreement, it's on the agenda for tonight. The location is the existing downtown city lot, and it will probably require 20 feet acquisition on either side, depending upon design. We just don't know yet, but I think that it probably will. To answer your question, Ronnie, from earlier.
So who does that affect in terms of property owners, and how does that work, the acquisition?
Oh, well, we always try and start with negotiation. So, the surrounding property owners are Business Resolution and J.J. Wong.
Is it one of their properties that were,
Both, well, J.J.'s on the north side and Business Res is on the south side, and the east side is, it's a bunch of those parcels there in that back alley, back of Beyond.
Yeah, no, not back of Beyond, south of back of Beyond.
La Hacienda? I mean, not,
No.
No.
Miguel's?
Okay, yeah, and then you know the Janie Walker's building
Yeah.
that's shuttered. I don't know if shuttered is the right adjective. Yeah.
Yeah,
So Business Res is Mr. Bynum, is that correct?
that's correct.
Okay. So just basically two people primarily that we have to talk to then, or?
Does that include the businesses on the west side, or maybe they're all renting it?
Yes, that's my understanding. And in discussions with both those property owners, they said, wait and see what happens. Come back and discuss it.
So Chuck, let me ask,
Smaller parking structure.
Right, possibly. Yeah, we don't know yet. Again, we don't have the design. I can't answer some of the questions in great detail because we haven't done the design yet.
I understand that. But Chuck, so just to touch on major milestones that might exist, it seems like acquiring the right-of-ways for a price we can afford would be one.
Yes?
And if it's not, then we'd have to talk about whether we would resort to eminent domain or not. I know we're very reluctant to do so, but anyway, so that would be one spot where we would come to a dead stop if we couldn't acquire right-of-way. The next one would be carry on farther on preliminary design work, see if groundwater's gonna get in the way, see, you know, if it's gonna be 3 stories up and 1 down, whatever it's gonna be, and kind of outline the building within the constraints of the right-of-ways that they did acquire. And that kind of getting the preliminary conceptual design might be a second part in which we could say proceed or not, and so forth. If I got that much?
Actually, I would flip that. The
Okay.
preliminary report will identify the right-of-way needs, because we'll evaluate alternatives,
Yeah.
come out with, make a choice on a preferred alternative. That'll determine the right-of-way needs.
So if you can't acquire a right-of-way, you design around it. Is that basically what you're saying?
That's right.
And to just be super clear, UDOT's going to give us the money and then we're going to contract and build.
Correct.
Right. Okay, thank you. That helps.
Okay.
And I was just going to check, so we don't know anything about ingress or egress yet, right? If there would be one, or if there'd be more than one?
We don't know that. We've had discussions about how it might work. We know that, I tried replying to you. I don't know if you guys all saw that or not. The ingress and egress, we don't know if it'll be 1 or 2, and we don't know, but we will consider standard size vehicles, bicycles, and pedestrians for ingress and egress, right? They'll all be considered those various forms of transportation. It's not gonna be a parking structure for cars that ignores pedestrians or ignores bicycles. We'll consider all that.
So as a preliminary plan, I mean, Deb, my wife and I know Deb, you know, who runs ISO Moab out there, and we were talking a little bit about this. So would I be too far off if I said probably that the conceptual design would involve people going south on Main Street, for example, turning right on Center, general clockwise circulation, if you will. You kind of go in on the south, out on the west side or maybe the north side?
That's what we do now in the city-owned lot is, right?
Okay.
In from Center Street, then out onto 100 West.
I think that's counterclockwise. I think what you're saying is it would be opposite or the same traffic flow.
We don't know yet. It is too early to tell. We'll study that.
She just thought if you went in you came on Center Street particularly because it's so narrow with the push-outs and all that, that if you went in on that side and came out on the same thing, it get all tangled up. That was her fear.
Chuck, is it would it be possible to be forward-thinking and have it in the back of our heads that this could be a transportation depot and have some sort of structure that would allow for buses or self-driving vans to come in and to pick people up? And, I mean, we need to be we need to think transportation. I mean, in the future.
Well, that could be, we could utilize Center Street as the area for a depot. No, that's a really good consideration. I mean, I've been kind of envisioning that like the first floor would be like maybe taller for RVs, which then would accommodate future buses. But anyway,
Lumen arbitrary radius is in there for that. But,
if it was a pull-through.
so here's the thing, to answer your question, and UDOT is expecting a parking structure with these elements in it, because that's what we represented. We'll have a budget. If we come in with the budget that has other amenities to it, they're allowing $500,000 for structural amenities, we called it. There's $500,000 in the budget for solar power, also, already in that 7.3 million. I think there's lots of opportunities to do things as we go through the design, whether it's using just the hotspot funding, or if we want to find other funding to enhance it, you know, as you're talking about making a transit hub. That's all good. That's all good possibilities. Yeah. But there is a time constraint. If council signs the agreement, we have to have design done in 14 months. And we can do that. You'll see that I'm recommending that we form a small steering committee with council and planning commission and business who could be flexible and dynamic and work quickly with us as we go through that and report back as need be as we go through the process. So I think there's lots of possibilities.
Right.
But what's important to UDOT, and I know Ryan didn't come to say this, but we presented to them as the Arches group what we wanted, and they're saying, yeah, we'll give you that and give you the money. So if you get that, okay, but if you can do other things with it, good for you.
Yeah, I can say, I want to specify that 320 parking stalls. You know, the reason for the 320 parking stalls, that number wasn't just necessarily thrown out there. There's going to be an elimination of, I believe it was 180 parking stalls on Main Street with the Main Street improvements. If those full Main Street improvements were to be foreseen, there would be 180 parking stalls removed there. There's, I believe, already an existing 70 parking stalls
71.
in the city lot that we would be building on top of. You know, so if you start getting into that, you know, we want to make sure that we at least set aside enough parking for those that would be removed on the Main Street parking or the Main Street improvements, because I think I've heard it from several citizens, and I think even some committee members, some council members, that, you know, it's a dangerous situation driving down Main Street with people parking and getting out of their vehicles. It gets congested down there. You know, there's some major advantages to doing something like Springdale did and kind of eliminating that and making it more pedestrian-friendly downtown area. I think this parking structure is the key to that, because without that, I don't think that you could even go and get into that forward-thinking idea of making downtown Moab more pedestrian-friendly and, you know, working with the shuttle systems and things like that. I think those are all things that could be tied into this and thought of during this. Can they be implemented with this funding? I don't think Chuck or I have those answers until we've gone further down the design path, whether they could be implemented with cost-wise. But as long as you plan this parking structure with those ideas in mind, you don't eliminate those with changing, you know, with how you design the parking structure, then those types of things can be brought in as additional components.
You don't prevent opportunities.
Yeah.
But this structure can be designed much like the hospital was. The hospital was designed to add another floor to at some point when we get there. So it could be designed to be dynamic and to morph into something other than just a parking structure. It's not all going to happen, like you said, with this hotspot money. This is just step one. And as as we add other projects to our infrastructure, and transit is part of infrastructure, it sounds to me like it can accommodate those sorts of things. We can also look at accommodating some of that transit on East Center Street. It will have to change, but it's a possibility.
I just want to go back for a second to the Main Street improvements, because there's no list of them or explanation of what that does or doesn't include in the study unless I missed it. So can someone remind me what that constitutes? Like if we're talking about the loss of 180 parking spots, was that that idea of the bulb outs or that was responsible for that? I just need a reminder.
I was going to get to it
Okay.
in a second. If I can, and if this doesn't answer your question, I'll answer it.
Since it's 12:50, you want to go through your final
Yeah.
slides, yeah.
So the constraints are, it's the existing downtown city lot primarily. It's 320 parking stalls, 4 stories, 3 up, 1 down. 1 year to bid after professional services procurement. Aesthetic treatment limited to 6% of the construction budget, which is the $498,000 I was talking about. The total budget's capped at $8.3 million for the structure and Main Street improvement if funds remain. And I'm still getting to that. The dispersed parking, so there's the parking structure, that's $7.3 million of the $10 million, right? 8.3 now, started out at 7.3 was the cost estimate. $1 million is going to be for the Main Street improvements if it all comes in. The dispersed parking was applied for and awarded funding from the state. It's being administered by UDOT right now. They have a consultant on board. We've been working with them. It's focused on offsetting the parking losses in the north area due to the Highway 191 widening. So that's where we're primarily focused on, is actually trying to get parking lots that are close to that area in 191 that'll lose their parking on the curve, for lack of a better way to put it, by the North Maverick, get that built. Concept designs have been completed on 4 properties. There's interest in moving to the next step by 3 of those properties. So that's moving.
When will we get details about that?
Next time we can talk about parking. Soon. So we've had the first meeting, initial contact to see if they're interested, and 3 of the 4 said yes, they're interested, with some concerns. So we're going back, talking to our attorneys, to make sure we can address those concerns. If they're happy with addressing those concerns, then we'll come and say, okay, here's what we're thinking.
Can you tell us where that is, or you can't talk about it yet?
Rather not. It's more or less the churches along the boulevard.
Okay.
Main Street improvements.
I just want to comment, though, that because we're talking about Emma Boulevard, and if we're talking about those property owners, that just be sure to let us know, as much as you can, and so much as you can.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks.
Hotspot funding eligible if funds remain from the 8.3 million. 11-foot lanes from 300 south to 400 north. 14-foot wide raised, zero-scaped, which means no landscaping. Median running intersection to intersection between 300 south and 400 north. Yeah, zero-scaped as opposed to zero-scaped. And 7-foot wide bike lanes from 300 south up to Cermak. So that's what was envisioned as the Main Street improvements. There were some bulb outs also. This is not a comprehensive list.
What does a zero-scape?
Can you go back?
Yeah.
What is zero-scaped? I know what zero-scaping is.
Yeah,
Concrete
zero
on
scale
That
has no-
concrete?
So the original scenario that the consultant presented to the group had a bunch of landscaping out there, and the maintenance guys from both UDOT and our maintenance people said, bad idea to put trees in the median because it'll break up the curbs. It'll also be a constant maintenance problem with leaves in the road, so UDOT took out the landscaping in the middle. So zero-scape just means it's a median.
Okay.
Could have some artwork in it.
That's what I was just gonna say,
Yeah,
we could
or
do some
things like that, but-
sculpture or artwork in it.
Yeah, it could have artwork, it's just not plants growing in the middle medians.
So, I'm sorry, 3 to 400, so, that's like Sweet Cravings down to,
300 south.
and then, but would you have a turning lane in there? I mean, isn't it
To be honest with you, this was the grayest area of all of the hotspot funding, these Main Street improvements. I think there's opportunities for those, if we get to the end of the parking structure and have money for these, there's lots of opportunities to have design modifications on these.
And I keep hearing
Can
you
I-
say they don't want to even allow left-hand turns in the
Right.
first place off Main Street.
So can I be clear that we're doing the parking structure because potentially in the future, we're gonna lose the 181 spots on Main Street?
Potentially.
I still want
And
clarification.
was anybody, like, did you guys show up to that public open house that we had? I mean, that was such a contentious meeting where the downtown businesses, I mean, really, I mean, I'm just curious how we're,
I just want really specific clarification. What 180 spots are we talking about? Is this from bulb outs, or what is this? Yes, because
This
we had a
sounds like
series
it's-
of
this is
meetings, and it
getting-
says again in the parking study that it was very clear we weren't going to lose Main Street parking. So I just want to make sure we aren't changing things on the public when they come tonight, or they listen to this, or they read the study in it.
Yeah.
What are the 180 spots?
There were the 180 spots that are along Main Street.
So they're Main Street parking.
They're Main Street
so like
parking.
100 to 300, all of Main Street parking.
That
I
has
just
never
wanna be
been
clear.
discussed
That was-
again.
No. Okay.
There was never any decisions made that that was going away. I'm being clear, though, there were discussions, just so you,
Yes, I know. But we're dealing with now 100 West and businesses saying, we don't have any choice, we've lost our parking, and now our consumers cannot come in and park in front of the business, and I mean, it's a difficult decision.
it is.
And Karen, I think we walked in, like, when we were elected, a year and 4 months ago, we walked into a process where that was what was considered was to remove Main Street parking and build the parking garage.
That is not
And
true.
Well, but I think, I don't know that it was even like presented to you all as existing council members either. What I will say is that, like, there was the sentiment when I took office that that was considered. And then I think we all said, we've heard the businesses, we're not going to remove parking from Main Street. So if the data of, like, the number of parking spots that would be created with the parking garage were based on the number of parking spots on Main Street, that's probably something to discuss.
I think Chuck said something very important. It was never decided. It was an option, and we got so much feedback from Main Street merchants that they didn't want to lose those, that we didn't make a hard and fast decision. It's always been out there as an option if we do those kinds of improvements to Main Street. Some of that is going to take up, it's going to take up space. It was never decided in those meetings to, yes, remove those.
It's repeatedly in the parking study, though, that we're supposed to vote on tonight, that is not going away, so.
So it was
Yeah.
never decided. That's what,
But I mean, if we're voting to approve that study tonight, then the implication is that we're not getting rid of it. So what message are we
that
sending the
was my
public?
understanding. It's just that,
So let me throw out this hypothetical question at council, if I may. Suppose that it was a given that Main Street parking was not going to go away, ever. All right, just take that for a moment. Under those circumstances, would you guys then still be in favor of building this parking garage?
Yes.
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 Okay,
If
because that's a
nothing
little bit
else,
different than what
if-
Karen suggested. I mean, because what Karen and Ronnie are telling us that they'd be much more comfortable building the parking garage if they thought they were going to lose parking spots somewhere else. But if that's not the case,
I'm not putting
no,
an if
no.
on then on that, I'm just, like, we're talking about apples and oranges here,
well, just
new
to an
things
extent.
that.
No,
No, I think Mike did a good job of, of what you're saying, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, the question that you just posed to us
Yeah.
is like the right question to be asking. And like Ronnie and Karen, I didn't hear what you said.
No, but I'm just trying to get clarification, because it was proposed that the parking structure was a step because we could potentially be losing the 181 parking spots.
I was on that committee, and so there was this pool of money available. we needed to come up with projects that were implementable in a short period of time. We didn't have the parking study. So we knew that we needed to, if we wanted to get the money for a community, we had to develop projects, proposed projects that would score well in the system, and UDOT helped facilitate that process. They had to be buildable, and we also needed more information. So we have like multiple efforts moving forward in parallel. We have a parking study, which largely looks at existing conditions, and like I'd like it if it also like projected like what would happen with different scenarios too. Like what if we build up? That's going to increase parking demand, and which with redevelopment is likely regardless of what happens with the parking on Main Street. And we're also talking about possible changes to the Main Street that are short of full-on parking removal, but that involve other changes that, like the stall delineation may improve utilization, but then there may be bulb outs mid-block that help improve the streetscape, that decrease capacity. So there's a range of options here. This plan largely addresses the existing situation and provides a foundation for some relatively cheap minor changes and perhaps some future analysis. And then we have this other project, the parking garage contract, which maybe there could have been maybe there's a better utilization of the funds, but we didn't come up with it at the time, and we've heard that changing horses at this point could be challenging. So, and then I guess separate from that is perhaps the messaging around this. I mean, when we discussed the Main Street parking in the hotspot committee, we knew it was controversial. It's always been controversial, despite the information that Springdale and other communities have about the impacts, that it's not so bad. It can actually be a good thing. But it was controversial when it was proposed 10 years ago. So the idea was, let's do the study, let's develop additional parking via dispersed parking and the parking garage and see where we're at. So.
Thank you so much for that context, because I think that's what I was referring to. So thank you. And so I really do want to go back to Mike's question, though, and just be clear with, Karen and Ronnie as well, just how you're feeling that. So what Mike asked was, assuming that Main Street parking would stay, are you still in support of the parking structure?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
The two are not at all linked in my mind.
Okay,
so I
right,
don't know where you got the idea that we're correlating that, but no, I'm basing on my opinion on the parking structure on the parking study results, which are a little bit confusing to me, looking at all of the places where it says parking is ample, to really make a strong case that the parking structure is needed. I can see from what you guys are saying, you're trying to plan for the future, and that 2-block section is more congested. So I'm willing to have the discussion about it and consider it, but it has nothing to do with that. I'm just upset because I feel blindsided by the things in the study that say that we have this commitment to Main Street parking to people, and that's in the study we're being asked to vote on and approve. And I don't want to send a mixed message to the public if there's somehow been a parallel discussion going on that parking is going somewhere.
Okay. So if I may, I want to clarify one more thing with you guys that's important to this. If we approve building this parking structure, I want to make it clear that, I will not vote for it if it commits us in any way to eliminating Main Street parking.
I don't think it does.
I don't want to know about the
Yes,
part. I want
please.
to know.
Ryan, I think you
Please.
made us nervous.
I think I said something that was taken the wrong way. The 320 parking stalls, what we didn't want to do, we think there's an immediate need. We think there's an existing need for a parking structure. What we didn't want to do is go build a parking structure that wouldn't accommodate the future needs, because we know that this project has been considered. These Main Street improvements have been considered. What I'm saying is we don't want to go build an undersized parking structure and then turn around and say we believe that these Main Street improvements could benefit downtown Moab, and say, well, we can't because the parking structure is not big enough to accommodate those parking stalls that we would lose. So what I'm saying is, you're right. These are two separate things, but what I'm trying to get to is we don't want to design a parking structure and just keep the idea of these Main Street improvements out of our head. We want to make sure that whatever parking structure we design could accommodate the improvements that have been proposed and the ideas that are out there about making downtown Moab more bike-friendly. And I can send any of you the concept study that was done and kind of the typical sections and layouts of what we see for downtown Moab, because as was mentioned, this is not the first city that we've gone to with these types of ideas. I think you guys have all driven down Main Street on a congested day and seen that parking on downtown Main Street can be dangerous. And so what we're saying is this would help with congestion, this would help with safety. We think this is something that at least down the road needs to be considered, and we don't want to be short-sighted in the design of the parking structure and not at least consider those stalls that would be lost with those improvements.
I appreciate that,
I think one thing
Ryan.
that we haven't mentioned is we've talked about our visitors and we've talked about the merchants having enough parking. We have heard in open meetings from certain business owners that if an employee of another business parks in front of their place, they go ask them to move. So this parking structure would accommodate a lot of those downtown employees. They'd have a safe, lighted place to park their car. You're not going to have young women in their late teens and early 20s getting off work at 1 or 2 in the morning whenever the bar closes and having to walk through a dark parking lot. Hopefully it will be lighted. Parking structures can create their own problems, just like truck stops, but I'm not going to be knee-jerk in that scenario either. There are ways that they can be designed that are safer, but our employees have said, I've heard from many downtown employees, I have to leave 15 or 20 minutes early to find a parking place, to find a place to park downtown that's relatively close to wherever I'm going. They would have a place to park, it would be safe, and they could, work the rest of their day, even if we made one level of that permitted for employees only.
That's right. We've talked about the flexibility of how we actually manage the operation. And if I can, to the point about removing parking on Main Street, adoption, I don't think that's in this study. Part of the reason we did this study was to determine independently if there was a need, and this graphic shows you that there is currently a need for parking in downtown with parking on Main Street, right? Whereas we have a problem with parking on Main Street right now today. So by building the structure, even if you leave all of those spaces on Main Street, there's a need as shown by this study.
So then what we are asked as a council is, are we in support of adopting the parking management plan and moving forward with the agreement with UDOT? And to Ronnie's point, we just want to be really clear that by moving forward with either, that we are not saying that we are removing parking from Main Street. Is that fair to say, Ronnie?
I can clarify, the agreement states, any remaining funds from the parking structure project will be used to further the design and construction of the Main Street improvements from 100 South to 200 North as detailed in the funding request. Like I said, I can send you guys a link to the funding request that was made. And I guess what I'm saying,
Did the funding request say that we were removing Main Street parking?
the funding request says Main Street improvements, and the conceptual design that was used shows a center median and no parking with a bike lane separated by a curb on each side of the road.
Okay, so that's fine that was what was
But that's a
applied for
concept.
and the concept, but what we're just saying right now is that
We're
like,
not approving
we're-
us to remove parking.
And that's only if you have money left over after you build it, that it goes towards that. If we spend the money on the parking
Okay,
garage,
well,
there's no money left
I'm
over
just
that
going to
doesn't
say for the
even
record
come in.
and to the media that if you look at page 125 of our packet, which is item 1 in the parking management study, it says the recently completed Moab downtown plan addressed parking at a high level, mentioning that, quote, parking was the #1 issue the team heard about during the community input process, unquote, and the plan specifically protected all the on-street parking in downtown. So what I am trying to explain 6 ways from Sunday is you can't ask us to approve this tonight and have us approve this and then come back a few months later and say, oh, well, we decided to have these downtown improvements, and while we approve this plan that says we're going to protect downtown planning, now we decided we're going to have improvements that take it away. That's what I'm saying. And I will not take up any more time.
No, we just don't want to lose Main Street parking. And that's what the plan says. And that's how we're
But
moving forward.
the implementation was made within this past hour that 180 spaces may disappear from Main Street.
So we haven't.
Well, that was by UDOT, but that's a good point.
We haven't adopted the downtown plan yet either. This document and kind of refers to it as though it's already, but we've actually, it's stalled out in planning commission and now.
Okay, well,
So-
I spent a lot of hours and a lot of days building goodwill with the community, collecting input, having discussions around downtown parking, and I just feel like this is disingenuous to the communication we've been trying to have with downtown businesses.
Let me offer this. One thing you said, Ryan, I thought was unsettling, all right, because what I heard was that if we approve the downtown parking plan, which is part and parcel of essentially approving the parking structure, which I'm for, mind you, all right. But you told me there's contract language that says that also implies that we approve the remainder of the maybe I'm using the wrong terminology, the remainder of the downtown parking plan, which in turn calls for Main Street improvements, which in turn calls for removal of downtown.
Is it possible to strike that sentence out?
I don't think it's possible to strike that sentence out because what was approved for this funding, and it's 8.3 million, we could reduce this agreement down to just the $7.3 million that was set aside for the parking structure itself. The other $1 million roughly was set aside to further study, but no one's saying that we're approving the removal of Main Street parking. Mm-hmm. No one's saying we're doing anything to Main Street necessarily other than I'll read it right off of here, further the design and I guess I could maybe take out design and concept of Main Street improvements, or further the concept and design of Main Street improvements. What I don't want to limit is, let's just run a quick scenario. There's been a lot of talk from different consultants, and then depending on how many levels we can design, you guys saw the assumptions that were listed in this agreement. If you looked at the agreement, there were some assumptions made that could change the scope, size, expense of the structure pretty dramatically. So let's just run a scenario and say there's no money available. Well, there's no money available. We don't study the downtown Main Street improvements any further. Let's run a scenario that says we can't build the structure as large as we thought. There's $2 million remaining. That $2 million, what we want that $2 million to go towards further studying the concept of removing parking further studying the concept of improving downtown Moab. A portion of that is, and the concept that was presented was a center turning median. You guys, it got brought up at our local government meeting. Left turns are a dangerous thing. Controlling those left turning movements, creating a safe space for pedestrians and cyclists. Those are all the things that were concepted. Now, if there was money available to go forward with that, we would be moving forward with the design. You would all be involved in that. UDOT's not going to come in and say, we're removing parking from Main Street and you guys don't have a say in it and that's just how it's going, and that's not what you're approving. We're just saying we want to be able to take that extra $1 million and look at ways to improve your downtown. That can be, those improvements can have input from all of you and all the stakeholders and the city engineer. This is your guys' money to use as well, so you would be having a consultant look at if we did these improvements to Main Street, would it improve the situation? What are the impacts? So it would be your guys' additional money to study your downtown. So we're not giving any predetermined conclusion of what that scope looks like. We're just saying we want you guys to study it further, and we think that there's some good options out there. One of those options was to remove parking.
And I think it's also important to note that this hotspot money is just not city money. This involved the county and local business owners. It was the Arches area. So it encompassed more than just the city, and it wasn't just city representatives that were on that committee.
If you can forgive me, weren't we presented a downtown study with the medians and the option from Avenue Consultants? I mean, so do we really need to spend more money on another study? Is that what that leftover money, I mean, I would imagine the leftover money would be used towards implementation
That is a
of.
really good point, because that study, that report did show parking was still on Main Street, that there were medians, and that it did have
They'll have to be
improvements.
design plans, I think is all Ryan's saying is.
And the downtown plan has a lot of recommendations for future studies. It's sort of a framework. It advises creating like different advisory committees and doing additional planning work. So it's not I'd hope that it would have more. I'd hope that it would have more in east and one in west,
Yes.
but it doesn't, so.
Do you feel Moab downtown needs more study?
I feel like there was a study done, there was recommendations that were presented to us. Some of them looked really great, and I thought my reading of the contract was that any leftover money would actually be used towards implementing
Yeah.
the recommendations.
Yeah, I agree.
Can we go back? I feel like I need to go back to Ronnie's statement about if we're signing the agreement with UDOT, that there's an implication of us being
I'm not talking about the
disingenuous.
agreement. No, I was talking
Oh.
about the parking management study, Emily.
Okay, so signing the parking management study, but the parking management study does say that parking would be kept on Main Street.
But Ryan just mentioned that those recommendations that we were presented showed parking was not on Main Street. Is that correct?
Maybe the conclusion here is, if you guys want me to remove like Chuck mentioned, there were 3 categories that were funded. Chuck, I think it might,
So,
there were 3 studies there were 3 concepts that were funded. The dispersed parking, the Moab parking structure, and the,
Main Street
Donation.
improvements.
do you want?
We don't want to refuse money, no, but when I was talking to, and this was David and this was last year, that could Main Street improvements be, because after we had our public comments regarding parking and biking on Main Street, it was overwhelming that businesses wanted to keep parking on Main Street, and that cyclists did not find biking on Main Street to be safe. And so one of the infrastructure improvements could also be that dedicated corners, dedicated intersections, there be like more built out bike parking, so that you could access Main Street with bicycles and then park and walk. And so that was something that was infrastructure. I don't want to refuse money or change the contract, but I think we're just saying with getting more specific with what the infrastructure or the improvements of Main Street would be, and just making sure that, I think that we're all just trying to be heard about the parking and the infrastructure.
So, what I envision, I think the agreement says this, if you sign the document, and I think if you approve this study, we will move forward with a steering advisory committee to get the parking structure done. Once that's out to bid and once it's constructed, we'll know if there's any money left over for Main Street improvements. There may be none, right? Because the study's 1.5 years old. If there's money left over, I can tell you, looking you in the eye right now, and for the record, we're not going to embark upon any Main Street improvements without coming back to council directly and seeing what you want to do and how we make that happen. I think there's a very easy to make that demarcation between them. And I don't think that conflicts with the agreement, and I don't think it conflicts with the study.
So does that feel comfortable to this council?
Yeah, as long as it's honored. This kind of disparity has existed for the last 1.5 years I've been on council, because one camp says, oh, because it was listed in the original study, we're going to have to do Main Street parking improvements and remove parking, which nobody wants, as they point out. And other people say, oh, no, we'll get the freedom to do whatever we want to do, which is what I think we're all trying to say. So as long as you guys can promise us that, I mean, I would feel,
But
Ryan,
for the freedom.
We'll come back to you.
yeah, I mean, I'd be more comfortable, Ryan, if you're comfortable, just simply saying the remainder of the money, if it exists, will be used towards furthering Main Street improvements as deemed suitable at the time. I mean, something like that, without,
We could look at talking through some of that language. I can tell you the Attorney General's office will be involved in how the agreement is put together. They have been up to this point, they were happy to be included in it again. The agreement needs to match up with what was funded. I don't think what you said is necessarily any different than what is said here, maybe the part that concerns everyone is the construction. And the reason the word construction was put in there is because I didn't want to limit you guys to only being able to use it for concept and design. I mean, if we look at it and we come up with some improvements that we think are constructible given the budget that's remaining, I want to be able to use it to build those.
Like bike parking lots.
And so that's my reasoning for putting the terminology of, design and construction. But as you guys have seen with our US 191 Lighting project, our design process, we don't look to alienate the city or the council from any of that process. We want your guys' input, we want your guys' solutions, we'll do whatever we can to make those work. So by no means in any of this agreement between UDOT and the city have we made any decisions about Main Street improvements. We're just saying this money will go to further that process.
Okay, so it's 120. Do we have any other comments or statements or anything, questions?
yeah, one
Before we
thing
get
very
moving.
quickly, just to get it on the record, Mr. Chief Engineer Williams and I talked shortly before the meeting. This concerns the flower shop on First West and Center. I talked to the owner. Chuck has promised to go out and take a look at that situation and see if the bike lanes can be altered to give that owner a couple of parking spaces, and he has promised to do that.
To go look at it. I will go evaluate.
Thank you, I appreciate that. So we'll see.
Chuck, given in the recommendations for the parking management study, they gave us approximate costs. Because we're going through the budget and we're trying to figure out what to budget, do you have recommendations, or were they already included in the engineering portion of the budget for what we should be budgeting for some of these things, whether it's striping or signage or?
We did not, we bumped up the maintenance for striping next year, I believe. We didn't do a detailed cost estimate on this parking study, but I believe there's room for the striping component of it.
Was your sense from the recommendations that there are things that we should be doing in the next year so that the council should look at upping the budget? I mean, a lot of these expenses are for signage, but it seems like the bigger items.
I actually think that the downtown stalls delineation is a positive thing and will help. And I think that if we want to put in more back-end angle parking, that'll be helpful too. So that'll be striping. So if there's a chance, I'll look at it again.
Okay, yeah, because it seems like a lot of these signs are $100 to $300, so I just didn't know if we have to put more money in or.
Yeah, because we're not going to budget today, right? Adopt it tonight?
No, it's our public hearing.
Yes. So there's still an opportunity to look at that.
Okay,
I will.
sounds good.
Okay. Anything further? Motion to, what is it?
Recess?
Recess.
We recess until 5 p.m.
Thank you, Mike. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Tawny. All those in favor?
Aye.
We are in recess. What do they call it at the state?